Hey there, so in this video I'm going to walk you through basically the concepts that we reviewed in the reading. I'm going to try to keep it as brief as possible, but there's a lot to go over, so bear with me. We'll start with why it's important to review. Well, one, we have to write an essay on it, and two, to take over ownership of our learning environment, put some of these ideas into practice in our own lives. So here's two key quotes from the reading, and these quotes capture basically how our habits transfer to other people in our lives, right? So in the reading, there's really two ways that our habits change based on our social ties. And the first way is from strong ties to weak ties, and the second way is from weak ties to strong ties. And so these quotes, basically, a movement starts because of strong ties, it grows to our weak ties, and it endures because we have this new habit, right? We've created a new social environment. The opposite way, and the weak ties way, is probably the way that our habits will change in school. Basically, people are attracted to a sense of community, and that would be through our weak ties. Then they get pushed into our like small groups, and that's where they kind of develop strong ties. And then like in the process of building these new strong ties, they develop new habits. So let's talk about that in terms of the actual examples that Duhigg gives in the book. Okay, so one of the examples he gives is the Montgomery Bus Boycott. And he argues that the boycott was successful because it changed community habits. And it started with strong ties. Basically, when Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat, she's arrested. She starts, all the people in her immediate community, her church, like social activists, they are enraged and they want to do something about it. So those are all her strong ties, because those are people that she knows personally, that she's close with. It spreads to the weak ties, the broader community, right? So now entire church communities are getting involved. Entire neighborhoods are getting involved. Those are not people who necessarily know Rosa Parks personally, but they're people that know people who know people who know people who are part of this community, right? And they get encouraged to participate in this movement. And that's how they develop these new habits where they're no longer riding the bus, they're carpooling, walking, looking out for each other. And they've developed new habits that then sustain the boycott, right? Because the boycott lasts for like, I think almost 2 years, right? So it starts with a powerful person. Rosa Parks is like a liked person. She has a lot of strong ties, but it moves beyond that to her weak ties, like the community itself. And then in the process, these new habits are formed, and it just becomes kind of like a natural part of being a community, and that's how the change is sustained. The second example is from the Saddleback Church. And that starts with weak ties and moves to strong ties. So basically, right, Pastor Warren is like, hey, how come no one goes to church anymore? And they're like, a million reasons we don't want to go, right? But the way that he facilitates this is he gets the church community, he puts them into small Bible study groups, right? So he's creating strong ties within these groups, and in those strong ties, they start to develop these habits of going to church, hanging out, creating these new habits around religion and religious practice. And then that's how change is sustained over time, right? Because then people you didn't know, you just like saw at church randomly, become your strong ties because you're hanging out with them weekly doing Bible study. Then you have a new habit, go to Bible study and go to church. And then that habit is sustained. So another way to look at this in social movements is, this is just, again, another breakdown. Strong ties determine an action, your strong ties spread to your weak ties, and then your weak ties adopt that action, and then in doing so, that becomes a new habit. Try to think of an outside example of this. Maybe your strong ties, you and your friends like to go out on the weekends. So every weekend you and your friends always go out, right? This could spread to your weak ties if you start inviting more people, right? Like, okay, so now I'm gonna invite my coworkers, I'm gonna invite my cousins, I'm gonna invite, my neighbors. We're all gonna go out, right? So then all of a sudden you have a larger group, right? And it becomes a popular thing to do. It's just like everybody's habit is on the weekend we go out, right? It starts with a group of friends and it builds out. From weak ties to strong ties would be weak ties introduce an action, then strong ties develop around that action, right? Okay, so maybe an example would be that you yourself like to go out, but you don't know anybody to go with you. So you just start going out on the weekends. In the process of doing that, you meet new people, you develop new friendships, you see people who are out, you make new friends that way. Then your strong ties are these people who go out with you. And then the habit becomes reinforced, right? So what am I going to do this weekend? Well, I'm going to go hang out with my friends. My friends like to go out. Now I'm going out more, right? So you can see that, like, from weak to strong, basically the habit itself creates the strong ties and then reinforces those strong ties. So an example of this in the academic setting. A group of friends takes a class together, right? So that would be, you're already friends and you're already in class together. So then the strong ties spread action to the weak ties. So you're in a group of friends that's taking a class together. You start to make more friends in that class outside of your initial group. You're more likely to go to class because your friends are there. These other people in the class are more likely to go too because now they're friendly with you as well, right? And your weak ties then adopt your action, right? So now everybody's going to class because everybody wants to hang out with their friends. It starts with like maybe 2 or 3 people decide to take a class together, but then they make friends with 2 to 3 more people in that class. And now everybody's going to class to hang out together. And you see how that like kind of snowball effect. Another scenario, and this is probably the more likely academic scenario, would be weak ties become strong ties, right? So you join a study group because you realize you need some more help on your math class, and you want to form a new habit of studying. In the study group, you start to make friends with people, and you're all connected by that action, the studying. All of a sudden, like, now you're going to the study group to hang out with your friends and to study, right? So it becomes self-directed in that, like, maybe I don't need help with my math class anymore, but I want to hang out with my friends, so I'm going to go to the study group, right? So you can see that this habit kind of becomes self-enforcing. And this is probably the way that we'll see this kind of habit develop in school, right? You join a class and they require you to annotate, right? So you start to do more annotations, right? Your habit is now forming because you're required to do it, but you'll do it in other classes as well. So that's like not necessarily a social example, but it shows you the power of like being in a social environment and how those habits become self-directed. All right, so using your weak ties to network on campus. Your strong ties are probably going to be your friends or like people you know in class, right? Weak ties are people you know but you're not close to, right? So like as your instructor, you know who I am, but I'm not your friend, right? It could be a teacher, it could be a counselor, it could be a classmate. Weak ties are important because they have access to opportunities that you don't know, right? Your friends don't know, right? If you're looking for a job, obviously you're going to ask your friends for any leads, right? Those are your strong ties. But maybe you also ask your counselor, and your counselor knows someone in the career center, and the career center has a job, right? Those are your weak ties. That's how you get access to more information, more opportunities. Your weak ties will know, like, they can know scholarship opportunities, they can have classes that they recommend to take, teachers that you should avoid, right? Resources on campus, right? Your weak ties are where you learn things that you don't already know, is through your weak ties. You can also use your weak ties to get ahead, right? And this is like kind of the power of networking. I wanted to add like a personal example here. When I was a graduate student at Mills College, I wanted to get into teaching, and I knew that I needed some sort of experience to do that. So instead of just cold calling instructors and being like, "Hey, can I be an intern?" Like, right? What I did was I went to my professor at Mills and I was like, "Hey, I want to be a teacher. I need to probably get some experience. What do you recommend?" And she's like, "Oh, I have a friend who teaches at DVC." So she called her friend and said, "Hey, I teach at DVC. Uh, can you help one of my students out?" And the professor at DVC was like, "For sure. I don't have any opportunities, but I know somebody who might have an opportunity." So then he emails his colleague. So this is like a complete stranger at this point, right? Like, it's my weak ties, my professor reaches out to her weak tie, her friend who reaches out to a weak tie, his colleague. And she takes me on as her intern. And now she is like a strong tie of mine. She's like somebody that I view as a mentor. So you can see that if I had just called random professors at DVC, I probably would not have gotten anywhere with that, right? But utilizing my weak ties, I'm able to find an opportunity that was unavailable to me before that. And so that's why I really think that networking is so important, is because it gives you access to opportunities that you otherwise would not have access to. Finally, this is a way that you could possibly just kind of brainstorm this. Like, if you need help with something, who would you ask? Who could be a strong tie that you might ask for help? Where could they kind of point you? This is kind of like just a template to kind of walk you through that process of like, how could you follow this same process that I went through? Really the takeaway from this chapter, I know the examples can be kind of confusing, and I know that the strong tie, weak tie, like habit forming thing can be confusing. Really what I want you to take away from this chapter is weak ties are how you get access to new information, and that weak ties can change your habits. And so in school, if you put yourself out there and you start making friends with different people, you join clubs, that sort of thing, you're really going to be able to change your habits for the better and become more engaged on campus, right? If you start going to club meeting, your friends are talking about studying, all of a sudden now you're studying with your friends, right? Like, so it's going to lead to more engagement on campus the more that you put yourself out there and try to develop these like weak tie relationships, because it'll ultimately lead to stronger ties and lead to new academic habits. All right, so this is a lot, and I know if you have questions, like, for sure, let's talk about it. Let's go over it again. All right.